Please stand here. Joe, before you do this, I feel a certain ceremonial moment is upon us, so I am going to take this off, and if I can please, let's just have a moment. Wear it well. So let's welcome our esteemed colleagues, and Joe, and the stage is yours, man.
Come on out, boys. Actually, yes, come on out, come on out. Thank you very much, Scott. Alex. I was looking forward to doing that. So I've been coming here to PopTech for 4 years, and I kept saying, why don't they want me on stage? Is there something I said? Why? But finally, Andrew relented and let me come up here. And I told him I'd come because I am doing something for NPR that's somewhat related to this, although I'm not quite exactly sure how. But anyway, there's a new project that I'm involved in, and some of you may have heard this, and you've heard Jim talk about something I've done with him, and John did something with him. It's called Joe's Big Idea. It wasn't my idea. It's actually a name that was sort of spit out by somebody who was sort of sick of coming to meetings, and they said, so what the latest with Joe's Big Idea? And the name stuck. But it's basically my attempt to point out that the news and science and the news and news are usually very different things. And so once you accept that, you can cover anything in the world that you think is interesting. And so I started writing stories about people, not because they had some paper in Science magazine or some press conference or something like that, but just things that I heard about that I thought were interesting, that I thought NPR's audience would be interested in. So the idea was for me to come out and talk to the people, some of whom I've interviewed, and Kevin, whom I've not, but would have been if I had known in advance that I wasn't going to be talking. We had somebody else who was going to come, and he was forced by the government thoughtfully shutting down not to be able to come. But anyway, so that's what we're going to do for the next 16 minutes and 22 seconds. I can count. And I'm sitting backstage thinking to myself, okay, I've just heard, whoa, that's comfortable. I've just heard a talk about luck and chance and games. I've heard a talk about tumors, and I've heard a talk about barnacles. And so naturally, I guess you're all thinking, the first question is probably what I'm thinking, which is, so do you think the momentum has shifted to St. Louis in the World Series? No, I don't. It's a little hard to, it is, I mean, the theme of Sparks of Brilliance, it's easy to see where each of you fit into that in a way. But I think I'd like to start in the questions by asking you, Jim. Dave Robertson said something that resonated with me about this notion of being creative in a constrained space. And you talked a lot about some of these, like big plans, change the equation, let's make it all different from here going forward. But you also talked to me about something that I thought was interesting as well, and that's this idea of we're stuck with the chemotherapy agents we have now, at least for the next 10 years. Even if you hit a home run on your first drug out the door, it's not gonna be in the clinic for a while. So we're stuck with what we got, but it seemed to me that the creativity that you brought to that question was something that people would be interested in. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Sure. So this is a project that is different than the one that I talked to you about today. In this case, in my clinic every week, I was frustrated by writing prescriptions for chemotherapy for kids that had recurrent cancer with no idea whatsoever if their cancer was already resistant to the medicine that I was prescribing. And certainly with no idea of whether if I took two medicines together, if they'd be more powerful than either one alone. And so people before me, brilliant people with lots of money and lots of time, looked to see if we could grow cancer cells in a culture dish with different drugs and learn which ones were effective and which ones were ineffective for particular patients. And despite brilliant people, decades of work, it totally failed. So I brought some engineers into the lab and challenged them to find a way to introduce chemotherapy into multiple different mapped places within a patient's cancer while it's in their body, and then to learn the following day, when we took it out for surgery, how the cancer responded to each of those drugs. And so we came up with an array of needles that gets inserted into the cancer. As it's withdrawn, it leaves columns of different chemotherapies behind, sometimes combinations of chemotherapies. And we can fix those tumors, section them crosswise. We can see whether the pathway is engaged and whether the cancer cells care if the pathway is engaged. We just entered our first clinical trial with this right now, and we're working with several pharmaceutical companies to prioritize their pipelines for combination therapies. But when you get to the question of constraints, in this case, the FDA will allow you to introduce a very tiny amount of drug into a patient without going for a full clinical trial under what's called an IND phase 1 study. And it turns out that we're introducing a fifth of a raindrop of volume of each of these chemotherapy agents. But because we're putting it in one location in the tumor, we can actually learn about efficacy and learn which drugs work and which ones do not work. And so that was, I think, a lovely design constraint that really challenged the engineers and further challenged the engineers when we told them that we had to deliver 4 microliters of every drug and get 100% injection rate. And then we had to load these backwards in a way that was safe to the pharmacists, and we could have no bubbles or other problems. And so it was really space-age engineering. And they came from the concept all the way through the clinical trial, and we've spent less than $1.4 million on developing those devices and are getting all those constraints met.
Yeah, I think that's just brilliant. And it strikes me that, in a way, this idea, I don't mean to, they're certainly on different planes, but I'm stuck as a radio reporter. I can have great ideas for communicating science to people through interpretive dance, but I'm going to be most effective by speaking, and that's why I think this idea of talking to scientists off the news about what's really important is really a fruitful way to bring science into American culture without trying to pretend that everything is a breakthrough. But John, I wanted to, we were sitting in the green room and we were talking about how, there's this sense of a eureka moment that people associate with creativity and science. And, I know you've run down the street naked after having an idea. No, but
it's one of my hobbies.
Yeah, but it's not true. It may not have come in a moment, but the idea, and we pressed you when I was interviewing you to try to identify, okay, so why would you start to think about, there's lots of people who've noticed that oysters and mussels and barnacles stick to things, but you're the one who decided to, and it's also hilarious because he's doing this work in Indiana. You would think, just thinking that you would do it in some coastal range, but no, it's in Indiana. He's got a tank. Misses the beach, I guess. But that's the kind of observation that sort of, I'm looking at something, I don't get it, I've got to explain it.
Yeah, I don't really think of it as a eureka moment, more as just curiosity. In my case, I was looking at these things. Gee, I wonder how they do, how they stick and stuff. And so I hit the library and figured out what was known, what was not known. A much larger amount was not known than I would have guessed. But I don't know. I think just plain curiosity can drive a lot of science. I bet actually. So actually, one of the great things about being here is we've got scientists and artists and everything in between. I was talking to an artist last night and explaining, here upstairs, and I was explaining some of the work that we do. And she started asking me, oh, well, do the animals do this or could they do that? And I said, you know what? It's an experiment that's going on in our lab right now. Mm-hmm. So some of the questions can be really basic. Somebody might interpret it as a eureka moment for, when you got the idea to work on this problem or not. But I think a lot of it just comes out of curiosity. And you don't have to be a highly trained scientist to have that curiosity and to ask the question. I bet if we all together after this went out to some tide pools near town, I bet everybody in this room could look in what's there and ask questions. Oh, how does this work? How does that work? And I bet you could each come up with some question that has not yet been answered. And it's just cool.
So Kevin, I I haven't talked with you before, and I certainly feel your pain coming on after Jim Olson.
That was really rough.
And you can imagine my pain trying to tie these three talks together.
Yeah. I can. I've been sharing it,
Right.
actually.
But I wonder, having heard these first two questions, whether you can help me out at all.
I think I can. I think I can.
Okay, good.
Here's how I would go at it.
Okay.
So I don't know much about any of that, but I grew up as an artist and as a designer, and then spent about 6 or 7 years just working with game designers every day, and there was this thing that I learned by working with them that was totally counterintuitive because it runs totally against the way that I was raised to be creative, which was blue sky, right? Which was just like no barriers, whatever. And the interesting thing is that we were making games for like it's a very specific platform where it has to do this very specific thing, and game designers would just grab it. And it's like every constraint that could come down, they would just grab it and just start working. And then sometimes they'd be like, aren't there any other further constraints, right? And the reason is because that's actually that's their work, that's their art, right? Is in producing new constraints, right? Like basically what chess is, if you think about it, is a whole system of things to prevent you from moving the pieces however you want, right? Golf is a bunch of rules to make it so that you don't just throw the ball into the hole, right? like these are constraints, right? And it was really learning by spending these 7 years that is actually where all the genius that I've seen out of the last, say, 10 years or so has been from people who were like, this is okay. Like what is it? What is the thing that I can grab onto and push against that prevents this from being a blue sky problem, right? And so that's how I would do it, something like that. I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
No, okay, all right. Okay, I mean, I'm just like...
That's not how you grew up. That's not how you were raised. No, not at all.
But what I kept hearing this week, and I wonder what you guys think about this, and John, you sort of alluded to this, is that there's such energy and support flowing from the people in the audience and from the people in the balcony down to the people on stage. There is such a drive to understand and help and do something. And one of the things that I think we also, I worry about as a journalist is knowing what's the right thing to believe in. Because I've been talking to people about this. I mean, when Darwin wrote On the Origin of Species, or at least published it in 1859, every educated person in the world could pick that book up and decide whether or not the arguments made sense or not. And the clock goes forward 150 years, and none of us will know enough to judge all three of these people's work. So we have to rely on surrogates, and we have to rely on people that we trust. So how would you say, bet on me? How do you, obviously funding agencies supposed to make careful decisions, but we know there's problems there. So how do you say, that you're not making false promises? You referred to that in your talk. I am obsessed by not promising something or exposing something that's not worth it. But it seemed to me that all three of you are doing things that are worth it. How do you convince people of that? John.
I guess what motivates me in science is just what's cool. So if you see something and you say, hey, that's cool, and if you can explain it to somebody else, and they say, yeah, that is cool, we're good. I mean, it's nice to save lives. That's a plus.
It is. It's a strong
argument. It's a strong argument.
Yeah. Strong start.
And it's that leaves the two of us sitting here. I make glue. But I think it's got to be cool, right? I mean, you're saving lives. That's nice, but it's also cool.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I mean.
But I'm not just talking. I mean, why you? Why you, Kevin? Why should I don't know. Who supports your research?
Well, now MIT.
Okay, so, but MIT gets money from somebody and they say, give it to us because we're better than the other guys. How do they make that argument successfully? To whom do they make it?
Well, I don't know because I don't know because that's, sort of somebody else's job. Yeah, but I'll tell you how I speak to the things that we make, which is that that they're the things that we make, whether they're games or other forms of play, they're answering some fundamental human needs that are often poorly addressed or unaddressed. And so, it's like right now, what I'm thinking about a lot is that all of the institutions that we have always relied on to bring us into sync, like we are here in this room right now, or everybody who's listening to this on the radio right now, or whatever it is that is happening right now, most of the institutions that did that, like churches or televisions, are sort of in decline, like just, in terms of the raw numbers of it. And games are the things that do that. Games are still the things that bring 10 million people to do something at once. They're still the things that bring 7 people around a table at once. There's a reason that the scientists at Los Alamos were doing that. Is it has something to do with this moment where they could actually synchronize, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about the value of what we're doing, it is that it's cool and it is that it's fun, but also it's that it satisfies some really essential human impulses that, in a way, are not well served elsewhere. So. Mm-hmm.
And you would still say that a lot of your work, I mean, ultimately, yes, it has this goal of helping patients, but whatever you do will advance knowledge.
Absolutely.
So I've gotten to a point where I just think it would be nice if you could argue in favor of support for science based on that and nothing else, because we're trying to understand the natural world.
I think that the challenge has been that was the heyday of NIH up until about 10 years ago. We could make that argument, and a fifth of grants that made that argument that were well put together were funded. Right now, 7% of grants that are getting funded in some of the agencies, and I think appropriately, taxpayers across the country are saying we want something for this money that we've been investing that will help our health, that will help our children lead healthier lives. So there's been a transition to translational medicine focus. But I think that when you're talking with individuals, you can't sit down and meet a peer review panel because you don't even know who they are. They're meeting behind closed doors, and it's their job to not let you know who they are. But when, for example, those 2 examples that I gave you with breast cancer, where we're going to see if we can chase those cancer cells down into the lymph nodes, or the little lasers that would hit the cancer cells that are lit up by tumor paint. A few weeks ago, we had a fundraiser with a group of 40 to 50-year-olds that are called the Innovators Network at the Hutchinson Center. And I just told them, look, we don't have money for either of these projects right now. And I think there's enough money in the room tonight to do one of them. I cannot promise you that it's going to work. What I'm hoping is that you'll fund this so that if we can show that there's a chance that it'll work, we could then go on to get other grants. And in addition to letting you try to fund it tonight, I'm going to give you a chance to vote on it and tell us which one you want to fund. And that's part of the conversation. I think that's something that really, I heard little bits and pieces of it coming through this week, but we really need to have a lot more conversation with those people who are engaged with us. There needs to be a way for them to tell us what they want to work on. And I think that that's part of, in this case, they know they're going to advance the knowledge, but we have no idea whether those ideas are going to work.
Yeah. Well, excuse me, if you wonder why I love my job, it's because I get to talk to people like this all the time. And one of the things I try to do is tell stories that at least capture some of the cool stuff that they're doing. And we're just about out of time, but I did want to say one thing before we go. I suppose I'll see some of you later this evening, and I want to forestall something now so that you don't walk up to me later, because I was sitting in the green room having this flash of nervousness where someone would come up to me and say, I know Andrew Zolli. Andrew Zolli is a friend of mine, and you're no Andrew Zolli. Thank you very much.